Very good Erev Shabbos to you all, members of the Sheffield Jewish community and beyond. As of the early hours of Thursday morning, we've gone into our second lockdown, which means that shul is now closed. So I am bringing back the Vayera service on Zoom, which will take place, all being well, in about 2 hours' time at 3:30. And this will be in addition to the Havdalah service, which goes on Saturday night, Motzei Shabbos, and that will be at 5:30. And you're welcome to log on to both of them. The email has already gone out with the details. This weekend is a UK Shabbaton at home, nationwide, and we are one of 90 communities have had our packs sent out via Judy's email. And you're welcome to join in, particularly the quiz Saturday night. You can join in. And I would encourage you to partake in that in the same way as other communities have done. So Shabbos starts today at 4:05, and tomorrow Shabbos will finish at 5:17. Yacht sites for this week are as follows. On Sunday, Gavin Swerdloff has yacht site for his father, Yisrael ben Ephraim Halevi. And on Tuesday, Phyllis Patnick has yacht site for her father, Abraham ben Pesach. That's for this week. A short resume of the Sedra. And the Haftarah as well, because the Haftarah is quite an interesting one. At the beginning of the Parsha of Vayera, which is the fourth in the book of Genesis, God reveals himself to Abraham 3 days after he circumcised himself, the first Jew to ever have a circumcision, and he was 99 at the time. I've heard of circumcision being delayed. 99 is... But Avram rushes off in the middle while talking to the Almighty to prepare a meal for 3 guests who have appeared on the horizon. It's a very, very hot day. One of the 3, who are actually angels disguised as men, announces that exactly in 1 year, Sarah, Abraham's wife, from whom he hadn't had any children, will indeed give birth to a son, even though naturally that couldn't happen. When Sarah hears that, she laughs. Then the Almighty continues his conversation once Abraham had taken care of the 3 guests, and he tells Abraham that he is going to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham pleads with the Almighty to perhaps spare them, but it's to no avail. 2 of the 3 disguised angels arrive in the doomed city, where Abraham's nephew Lot had indeed taken up residence, and he, like his uncle, extends his hospitality to those angels and protects them from the evil intentions of the sodomite mob that surround the house. The 2 guests reveal that they have come to overturn the place and to save Lot and his family, and they are warned to leave the city in a hurry and not look back. Lot's wife does, and she turns into a pillar of salt. While taking shelter in a cave, Lot's 2 daughters, believing that they and their father are the only ones left alive in the world, get their father drunk and lie with him and become pregnant. The 2 sons born with this incident are the nations of Moab, Moav, and Ammon. Abraham then moves to Gerar, where the Philistine king Avimelech takes Sarah, who is presented as Abraham's sister, to protect her and protect him. But they nevertheless went off with Sarah. In a dream, God appears to Avimelech and warns him that unless he returns this wife to her husband, then he would have all sorts of nasty things happen to him, and he will indeed end up dying. Abraham explains that he feared he would be killed over his wife Sarah. When questioned, why did you say she was your sister? He said, well, if I say my husband, they would kill me and take her, because they were careful not to take married women. This is the post-flood era. But they would quite happily bump Abraham off so that she's no longer married, and then they can have her. God remembers his promise to Sarah and gives her and Abraham a son who is named Isaac. Yitzchak means to laugh. Isaac is circumcised at the age of 8 days old, the first Jew to ever have his bris at 8 days. And Abraham is 100 years old, and Sarah is 90 at their child's birth. Now, Abraham had previously married an Egyptian princess named Hagar, who'd come to work in the house. And from her, he had had a son called Ishmael. However, they brought idolatrous practices into the house, so Sarah banished them from the home, and they were left to wander in the desert. However, God hears the cry of the dying lad and saves his life by showing his mother where a well can be found. And they eventually make their way back to Abraham's home, and peace is restored. Abimelech makes a treaty with Abraham at Beersheba. Abraham gives him 7 sheep as a sign of their truce. The final Parsha is when God tests Abraham's devotion by commanding him to sacrifice his son Isaac on Mount Moriah, which is now the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Isaac is bound and placed on the altar, and Abraham raises his knife about to slaughter his son when a heavenly voice calls to him and says, "Stay thy hand." Instead of sacrificing his son, a ram nearby, whose horns had got stuck in the hedge, was taken and offered instead. The ram has 2 horns, and one of those horns was used at Mount Sinai, and the second horn you're still going to hear, because that's the horn that Mashiach will blow when he comes. The connection with Rosh Hashanah is obvious, because we remind God of the devotion that Abraham had, and the fact that he was prepared to offer up his son. And that, if you like, brings us a happy new year. That's why we read this portion on the 2nd day of Rosh Hashanah. Haftarah is interesting, because just like God promised to Abraham and Sarah that they would have a child, there's a similar incident which occurs many years later with the prophet Elisha, who was the disciple of Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, and goes into a number of miracles. It starts off with the first miracle that Elisha performed, which was a widow. She was the wife of Obadiah the prophet, but he died young. And she came to Elisha and she said that because her husband is no more, she's heavily in debt. She had, he was a young fellow, he was very young, and he hadn't yet worked off his years to be able to pay off the monies he owed. And the creditors were threatening to take her 2 children away as servants in order to pay off the debt. So the prophet asked her, what have you got in your house? And she says, Eini akim osach shomen. He said, the only thing I have is a jar of oil. So Elisha says, right, gather as many empty containers as possible, anything, pans, jugs, barrels, whatever you can get your hold of, fill the house with them, shut the door and start pouring. She did as she was told, and as she filled one vessel, the children helped to move that one out of the way and put a new one there, and then you empty one, and the small jar of oil kept on pouring and pouring and pouring until the whole house was full of massive containers with oil. She sold the oil for a lot of money. She was able to repay her debts and live out the rest of her days in comfort. The second miracle is that Elisha would often pass by the city of Shunam. There he would stay at her house. And we don't know who, I don't know what her name was, but she's known as a Shunammite woman. And this couple were wealthy, and they made a special loft extension that was to be Elisha's guest room whenever he came. Nobody else went into that room. At some point, he calls Elisha the prophet is staying there, and he calls her to the door, and he says, listen, is there anything I can give you in return? And she says, she didn't say anything. Elisha had a disciple with him called Gehazi, and he says to Elisha, look, she's not saying it, but I happen to know they don't have children. So Elisha promises that a year later they would have a child, just like the angel promised Sarah that she would give birth to a child. And indeed, this is what happens. However, some years later, the son was out during the day playing in the fields and complained of a headache. They took him home. He sat on his mother's knee and he died. The Shunammite woman is very distraught, but she hatches a plan. She lays the lifeless body of her son on the bed in Elisha's special room. She goes to the place where the prophet is known to be, and she asks him to come back and sort this out. So Elisha hurries back, lays himself over the child, and brings the soul of the child back. According to the Kabbalah, the child came later on the prophet Habakkuk. There's an interesting story it comes to the Book of Kings. Can't remember where it is. The second Book of Kings, chapter 2, I think, and onwards. 2 or 3, something like that. No, it's chapter 4. Let's do a little bit of davening. Lechun ranenal Adonai Navia letzu yeshenu nekadma fanav b'sahayada bismirais nari haloi ki al gadol Adonai melech kol hakolim asher biyado machrei haaretz v'sayafetz harim la'asher le'ayam v'asav v'beshes yadav yatzaru bayu nishtachah v'nichra ani v'chol afi Adonai seini yuleinu v'anachayitzav v'seimi yadayim k'esu Hatak Shavavkum Vrima Kivas Melsheda Salam Seichem Chanu Leganu Efali Habai Shana Kudedai Vayamar Anto Yelevoheim Veheim La Yadu Derachai Hashem Nishbati V'yahapi Him Yavayun El Menuchasi Shiru Ladina Shichoda Shiru Ladina Chodas Giladina Rakol Gilam Milim Father in Shamayim Basa Hail Fana Yismechu Hashomayim V'sagel Haaretz Yiram Hayam U'Meloi Yalei Sodai V'chol Asher Boi Yas Yiranenu Kol Atzei Yoar Lifnei Adonai Akiva Kiva lishbait haaretz yishbait vehel b'tzedek veyamim be'emunasoi Adonai melech togel haaretz v'chom nam nizom Ayam Adonai Yesinura Shoyme Nafshois Chasidam Yad Shoym Yatzilei Zaru Ala Tzadik Udi Yisraelei V'Simecha Simechu Tzadikim Badahoyanoi V'Hoyadu Lezecher Kodshoi Mizmei Shur Adonai Shechodesh Get the first version of Yishpoit vehel b'tzedek v'yamim b'meisharim Adonai Baruch Yisrael Adonai Natan Nisam and I say Yisalahem V'naikim Malali Nisam Rememu Adonai Eloheinu V'hishtachavu Lahar Kodshoi Ki Kadai Shaddai Adonai Elohei. This is a little bit of davening. You're welcome to join the Zoom later on. As we go into Shabbos, we don't have a clarity as to who will be the next president of the United States. The Donald has come up trumps again, or President Biden, Joe Biden, is going to be the new president. Well, was the vice president, he's going to be the new president. Watching all the goings on, one has to wonder, has to marvel, I think, at the fantastic situation of democracy, that we can argue about these things. I know it's an argument, and I know there's a lot of campaigning that's going on, but thank God it's like that, and it's not just somebody decides and that's the end of it. You don't have a choice. This is the significance of the individual, that every vote counts. And every vote is backed by a person whose opinion matters. And that's one of the greatest examples one can see in the world of democracy, that every person matters and you have a say. It may only be one say, but it's yours and you have it. In the world of the Almighty, in God's world, not just America, but anywhere in the world, whether you live in it under a dictatorship or we live in a democracy, every person matters in God's world. Every person has something to contribute. Now, this was a subject of some discussion years ago in the 10th century, 11th century, 12th century philosophers that talked about the hashgacha pratis, the divine providence of the Almighty. And they said, is God watching over everything that happens, or is it left to happen at random? And some said, God looks after the big issues, the little issues he pays no attention. Baal Shem Tov came along 300 years ago and said, no. Based on the teaching of the Arizal, who understood these things the best, every single detail is God's divine providence. And that's if you're talking about the leaves that flutter in the winds that are clogging our streets at the moment. Which leaf will fall, when it will fall, or whether it will fall this way up or that way up, and the exact spot, all of which is controlled by the Almighty. Because if you'd have one leaf that can go where it wants and God has no control over it, the question will be, how does it manage? How does it do that? How could anything exist independently of the good Lord? And the second principle that the Baal Shem Tov popularized was that each part of divine providence is as relevant as the biggest event ever. So where that leaf lands is as much as significant as who becomes the next president of the United States. Why? Because it's all part of God's divine providence. It makes no difference whether we understand what difference it makes. It's still backed by the good Lord. And if he says there's some significance, well, then there's some significance. So if you think about yourselves, or maybe sitting at home this Shabbos and we have not able to go to shul, make no mistake, you all have significance. And what you do, even in the privacy of your own home, and the prayers that you say when nobody else will hear them but the Almighty, are extremely valuable, perhaps now more so than ever. Why? Because every person matters, every vote matters, and you matter. And when we get our heads around understanding that every person matters, I think we'll have the ultimate thing that we want, which is world peace. It's not so easy to acquire, but we'll get it. However, in order for that message to reach the world, I think we need a loud voice, and that is none other than Mashiach. Have a very good Shabbos.